Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 creatures which you need for the island, so let's get into it. In at number 10 is the Deon, and there is no doubt that this is one of the most useful creatures on the island, namely for its bossing abilities. Obviously this isn't going to be the creature which is going to defeat any kind of boss. It does not have the melee damage to do that, but if you level up this thing's food stat like absolute crazy, and then you can use this thing to heal up your dinosaurs in the boss fight, which is a very useful thing, and especially because there's no things like snarls on the island. Yes, you can transfer, but all the creatures on this list do natively spawn on the island, so don't expect any others. The Deon is pretty much your only option out there, and its ability is just so good and it is so easy to use. The only real downside being the amount of meat it consumes, and you're going to need to really pump that hunger, but it actually isn't too bad and it is definitely worth it. In at number 9 is the Baselo, and this creature is pretty much your best bet for doing any kind of cave runs which you'll find out there. Obviously underwater ones, this thing is not a land creature, and I think there are 2 underwater caves on the island, one of the artifacts being used for the Megapithecus and one of them being used for the dragon. I'm pretty sure there's only 2, yeah, there's only 2 underwater caves, and the Basilosaurus is going to be extremely useful in all of those cases. It has the damage to deal some of a fight. Yes, it isn't going to stack up to the Mosasaur, but the fact that this thing is immune to electric eels and jellyfish and all those things makes this one of the most safe creatures to take into the ocean, as most of the threats are now just not even able to do their main abilities. The only thing you really have to take into mind is the fact that they have a depth limit, but as a nice little bonus, these things will also passively make oil. Next up, we have the Uranus, and again, compared to the Deon, the story is very similar. This is a great boss creature, which I think is highly essential for the island, and it is useful on all 3 of those boss fights, and it definitely is one which you'll want to use at some point 100%, as obviously this isn't going to deal the damage in the boss fight, although you could use uses for that. That's not really their use case, and they're not going to heal up the creatures because that's the Deon's job. This thing will buff up all of those creatures with its all famous Courage Roar, and courageous you can also be if you drop a quick sub on the channel. It is always greatly appreciated. But it also does have the Fear Roar as well, which isn't particularly useful for bosses due to the size limit on the Fear Roar, but if someone's trying to raid your base in PvP on a Pteranodon, then you can use the Fear Roar if you have a Uranus on you, and they will have no chance in raiding you or scouting your base out whatsoever. Good PvP tip if you didn't know that already. In at number 7 is the Aloe, and this creature is a really great entry level carnivore on the island, and you may get somewhat angry with what I've put in the number 2 spot. If you know me already, you'll know what's in that spot, and you might want to put the Aloe in the number 2 spot, and the creature which is in number 2 in this spot, and that is totally fine. You can form your own opinions on these dinosaurs. This is just my take, as albeit the Aloe is an amazing creature, inflicting a great amount of bleed damage and having a very useful pack buff, it just isn't my go-to carnivore of choice, as it is a little bit too out of reach in terms of the level in some ways of when it is unlocked, as it is a much harder tame than the other one that is on this list, obviously. And also, I kind of don't like the size as much. I prefer those smaller carnivores. I just feel like I have a little bit more protection, and albeit the Aloe is much more powerful than the creature which shall not be named, which is obviously in the number 2 spot, the Aloe is just, I don't know, it's just not as appealing to me in a lot of ways. but I will definitely say that it is a truly amazing creature, which if you get the chance to on the island, which everyone realistically should, and especially on ASA as they are so easy to tame with the new baby dino mechanic, you really can't miss out on taming a pack of allos. Remember, pack size is always 3, so if your pack aren't working, if you only have 2 allos, get a third one and that pack buff will appear. Next up on the list we have the Rex, and this is pretty much your go-to boss creature which you can use on the island. Although in the honourable mentions section of this video there are a couple of other creatures which are great boss creatures, but which sadly didn't make it on my top 10, but they may have made it on yours. Either way, back to talking about the Rex, you can kind of tell why this is such a great boss creature. It is a big hunking carnivore with great big teeth and a lot of power. And compared to a lot of other carnivores, I feel like I'm saying a lot, just did say it twice in a sentence there, but either way, compared to other carnivores, this thing's health is actually way higher than loads of the other options, making it the ideal boss creature for you to go with, as it is just such a balanced creature. While yes, it isn't the carnivore which deals the most amount of damage on the island, which is still allowed into bosses. The Giga I'm not counting here, as the Giga is sort of in a different league as a carnivore, but in terms of things like the Spino, yes, it will deal more damage, but its health is a lot lower, so the Rex is usually the go-to, and the Rex is significantly easier to tame, and its saddle also doesn't require silica pulse to craft, which can be a very big annoyance. Although at that stage of the game it isn't too much of a hindrance, it still can be a bit of one. In at number 5 is the Thorler, and there is a lot to say about the Thorler, and this creature is just so good at so many things, and it is actually one of the most versatile art creatures in my opinion. I've just done a top 10 on that recently, so if you go look on the channel you can see that top 10 if you're keen on it. And also in terms of the Thorler's abilities, obviously apart from it just being versatile, this thing is a really great climber of all things. You saw it climb redwood trees there, but it can climb any kind of wall or vertical surface. Although meshing and meshes is a big glitch on ASA at the moment, so you can get yourself into some pretty sticky situations with terrain, and even fall through the terrain if you know that's your thing. But you know, ASA is still an early access game. They could have definitely worked on it a lot more though. But in terms of its other abilities as well, it isn't just a really great travel mount. Although it is a great use for it, it is also a really great carnivore, sadly not being allowed into boss fights. But I guess we have the Deinonychus on Valguero if you want a boss creature with kind of similar abilities to this, as that creature can also climb, but it is allowed into bosses, and in my opinion it is better than the Thorler, but that doesn't spawn on the island, so therefore it does not qualify for this list. But the main reason for its great attack is obviously that bleed ability which it has. Barely any other carnivores have this, which kind of doesn't make sense considering what they're doing, and they're literally ripping right into a creature. You'd expect bleed damage to occur, but most carnivores don't even use that ability, and the fact that this has it is a huge bonus. Next up we have the Thea, and would it really be a list without the Thea here? This creature is just so useful for so many things, it had to be put on this list. The Freddy Krueger of Ark, with its saddle unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
This thing really does pack a punch in all of its abilities. Namely its fiber gathering, which barely any creatures can stack up to, although the Moss Chops is a great shout in the early game. Sadly it isn't on the list or in the honourable mentions, but you know, I guess it got a little mention here with the Thea. But also the Thea is great at gathering berries as well, and so with wood and thatch too. And it is a pretty good meat gatherer as well, as this thing really does pack a punch in terms of damage. And it is the go-to creature for doing the dragon boss fight, as that boss is very very unfair to all kinds of carnivores, and it is really nice to have this creature as a backup. Although the only real downside is sweet vegetable cake is the only way that you can really heal these things up in a quick manner. But if you have a Deon with you, that really shouldn't be too much of an issue. In at number 3, we have the Bionics. And would it really be a top 10 the Island Creatures list without this thing appearing at some point? This is by far the best caving creature on the island, and there is no competition at all. No creature can stack up to this thing in all of its abilities. It is just so good at caving. It has to be put on this list for all of its greatness in every aspect of caving. It's the right size and it deals a heavy amount of damage with a reasonable health stat, great stamina and great weight to go with it too. There is nothing which could really be improved about with this creature. Maybe apart from it not eating normal meat instead of fish meat, and the fact that it spawns in the swamp isn't great. But I'm happy to take those as some side effects for a creature which is just this good. It is almost too good to be true. And it also does have a right click attack in the water which can stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon. And it is a very viable solution if you don't have a Basilosaurus for the underwater caves on the island. And this is the creature which I said when I was talking about the aloe. You may be a little bit upset at this being in the number 2 spot, but I absolutely adore the Caro in so many ways. It has to be put on the number 2 slot for me. The also amount of nostalgia I get from this creature is insane, and it has the bleed ability too, and although it doesn't have the pack buff, it is a much more manageable size, and also it is a very nice carnivore to control as well. Albeit the aloe has a nice turning circle and all of that, but the Caro really just feels much nicer to control, and in my opinion it is just a better designed creature. And also with its comedically small arms, you have something to laugh about with this thing too, and it just has so much character around it. And again, its saddle level being in the 40s or 50s, I can't remember. It's one of those. It's very achievable for any Ark player really, if you just put a little bit of effort into the game. It is a really great carnivore in the early stages of, obviously mid stages as well. And you don't even need the saddle to fully utilize this creature. You can just have it following you around on adventures until you get that saddle, and you could be leveling up along the way to get it ready for when you first ride it. A very good, very good strategy actually, considering that trank arrows unlock at level 21, and from there it is really easy to make a basic wooden trap and just trank this thing out. You really cannot go wrong with the Caro. But before we get into number 1, I have a few quick honorable mentions. And finally, in at number 1, we have the RG. And really, what did you expect? This thing is an absolute beast of a creature which really does deserve to be respected. And it is a go-to on all maps except Operation and Gen 1, as obviously flyers aren't allowed on those maps. Well, on all other maps, you need an RG really. These creatures are just that useful. They are the pinnacle of metal resource gathering, and when paired with something like an Anki or a Dodic, which I'm kind of going to tie into the number 1 spots here, as they really work well together as creatures, you have yourself pretty much the best harvesting creature combination which you could possibly have. The RG has weight reduction on things like metal, crystal, obsidian, and much more, and paired with something like the Anki, which can gather insane amounts of metal, it really is set up for success. And the RG deals a reasonable amount of damage as well, has a great weight stat and a great stamina stat, which is actually why the stamina didn't even make the top 10 list, as usually I'll just go straight to the RG, and albeit the Pteranodon is a good tame which is great for beginners and very beginner friendly, I always just go straight for the RG and don't even bother with the Pteranodon. And on top of that as well, its saddle acts as a portable smithy, which is a nice thing if one of your metal weapons breaks out on your travels, or your flak armor in cave runs, and also it has a nice little neat regen buff if you eat a dead corpse. This creature is amazing. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you enjoyed this one, and I'm glad the channel is now back in full swing. And comment down below your top 10 The Island Tames, and I'll see you all later.